we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Got the second part there. Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. The latter part of that was showing the assassination the following day, April 4th. There was a time where I couldn't watch that without crying. I mean, this man, human if he was a Jesus-like figure as far as I'm concerned. I mean, a lot of people won't agree with me. But this tore my heart apart. You know, I had hoped that there would be some peaceful resolution to racism, but you know, following Martin and Malcolm, it's difficult to see that there could possibly be because of racism all these many years. So we see how it took out Martin. And we have a pastor of Nazarene Church.
Nazarene Congregation.
Nazarene Congregation Church, isn't
yes.
it? Reverend Minister Tillard.
Reverend Conrad Tillard.
Conrad Tillard.
Yeah.
And you went by what name before? Conrad Mohammed?
Well, that's right.
That was many years ago?
Many years ago, yeah. Yeah.
And you were a Muslim then and a Christian now. And how does Martin Luther King affect you in these days and times of...
Well, Dr. King, you know, the older I get, the more I develop a tremendous appreciation for Dr. King. I always appreciated Dr. King. Indeed, I grew up in the tradition of the black church and the civil rights movement.
All right.
Later, I found out about the tradition of Malcolm and the black nationalists. And I hold both of those traditions in very, very high esteem.
Okay.
But Dr. King, the older I get, the more I understand and have developed such a deep regard and respect for him. And I tell you why, is that Dr. King achieved the highest level of popularity and acceptability. But he, like Du Bois, like Paul Robeson, he never stayed on that pinnacle if it meant he had to compromise his voice. And it's one thing to be angry and on the outside, but when you're on the inside and you choose to continue to stand on the principle of integrity, even if that means getting you thrown out of the White House, and yet you do that's something that's very great.
Yeah, talking about the Vietnam War.
Absolutely,
Right.
Stands on Vietnam.
Right.
And his critique of capitalism, and many, many things toward those latter years of his life. Now, he had to evolve to the understanding that Malcolm had, that the nationalists had. But he did do that, and he was inside. There are a lot of Negroes who have evolved in terms of understanding, and they're on the inside, but they're not going to say it because they don't want to be thrown out. And so he was very honest. He was honest as a young man, growing up in the black church, in the black middle class. He was honest as a seminarian, PhD student. He was honest as a black pastor. But every time he gained more knowledge, when he was in the South, he thought the only problem we had was integration and civil rights. When he went to Chicago and began to engage with our folks
Housing.
in the North, he thought it was housing at first, but then he saw it was despair and ultimately racism and the inequities in society, and that led to his fundamental critique of capitalism and call, as he was doing toward the end of his life, for a reordering of society. And that is something that's to be honored, because you can count the people on your hand today who have access, who have found themselves with access somehow in some way, and yet will not make the kind of substantive, principled critiques that Dr. King made. So Dr. King is, in my book, he's top shelf, and he is a prophetic figure. I will agree with you. He is a prophetic figure. There's no question about that. I highly, highly regard Dr. Martin Luther King.
On the same note, you turned to Malcolm. And Malcolm was a strong black man that fought for his cause.
Absolutely.
And you were a Muslim for how many years?
For about 14 years.
14 years,
right.
okay.
But, when I was a freshman in college, I worked, my first assignment, my first work was with Reverend Jesse Jackson in his first presidential campaign of 1984. And,
I remember that.
and I was very enthusiastic about that, and I became politicized in the context of that campaign. And it just so happened that the two most powerful voices of that era in terms of the black community, one was Reverend Jackson and the other was Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so about a year and a half later, I found myself attending the mosque, and ultimately I was moved and became a member of the nation.
We're talking about what years?
1984, 85, around 85 is when I became a member, and I was an active member until 1997.
So, okay, all right.
So as a pastor now in Bed-Stuy, and looking at the events of the last week with the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, I know that the police commissioner, or borough president Eric Adams, had a meeting with the clergy downtown last week, and the police commissioner has also had a meeting. I spoke with the chief of the department 2 days ago, Chief O'Neill. I spoke with him. And regarding that incident and some other things that are going on in the city and some of the changes that the police department is going to be implementing, would you say that the issue of security around churches is something that is an issue that has just evolved? Because black churches are not, this experience is not new to us.
Right.
Well, it was so long ago.
As a people.
Yeah. Right.
And most people don't know about the violence and the shootings that have taken place in churches across the country over the last few years. There have been over 150 shootings in churches in this country, and more than one pastor has been murdered in his pulpit while preaching. Mm-hmm. But now it is something, because so many people were shot, they're beginning to look at it, and because it was a hate crime. Do you feel any threats? Do you see the need?
Well, I definitely see the need. You know, being a pastor, mm-hmm. Like being a doctor, like being a police officer, like being a school teacher. Mm-hmm. You're on the front line, but you don't often think about that because mm-hmm. you are engaged in doing your work. However, I do agree that our churches have been lax in security. I think you touched on why the historic challenges that the black mm-hmm. church had. This church, Mother Emanuel in South Carolina, it was burned to the ground in the aftermath of the Denmark Vesey rebellion mm-hmm. right. because of its role in that. And of course, we know throughout the South in the civil rights movement, many churches were burned. In fact, when I was a small boy, my family attended Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And we just happened not to be in church one Sunday when Martin Luther King's mother was killed in
murdered
church.
At the altar.
And
right.
so,
mm-hmm.
you know,
that's the 60s, though.
No, that was the 70s.
70s.
That was the 70s.
Mid-70s.
About 74, 1974.
74?
Right. So the point I'm making is there's been a historic threat against the black church.
Right.
And I think we do have amnesia. You know, we get to a point, and this is why I respect the vigilance of the Jewish community. I was blessed to go to Israel. I went to the Yad Vashem Museum, the National Holocaust Museum there in Israel. And, you know, that whole concept of never forgetting is a theme that runs through Jewish culture, Jewish life. And it's an admirable theme. And African Americans, we need to maintain that. We are folks, as I used to hear the old folks say, when we got $2 or $3 over the rent and utility money, we forgot. We forget about our history. We don't teach it to our young people. Mm-hmm. Many of our young people don't know the history. And so when something like this happens, it's a shock, because it's a shock because we don't have an appreciation of the context. And while I don't believe that we should be paranoid, I mean, my church is always open. Going to always open the doors of the church to whoever comes. These people were prayer meeting and Bible study. That's an occupational hazard. The doors are open to all. But I do believe that the nation has given us a very, very important and instructive kind of model in terms of security in our houses of worship. It's very important. And I don't think anything can make it more clear than the events, the tragic events of last week.
Yeah, I see it like Nehemiah. It's this where the story of Nehemiah, when Artaxerxes gave him permission to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city walls. And there were those that were seeking to challenge what he was doing. But Nehemiah had men to stand guard while the work was being done. And this is where we are, where we always should have been, because anything of value you have to protect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because there's always someone, your marriage has to be protected.
Absolutely.
Because someone is going to try and upset that. Everything we own, everything we're about has to be protected. I know at our church, you know, we have a structure. And people haven't understood why we have that structure. Right. Now they understand.
Right, absolutely. Pastor A.R. Bernard,
right.
Pastor,
right.
Dr. Youngblood,
Johnny Ray.
And more and more churches are beginning to implement that model.
How could he have prevented this, what, with metal detectors at the door?
Well, you know, some people have used the model of metal detectors. Some people have security personnel that are observant and watchful of strange persons that come come in among us and how people are acting and so forth. So
But
these are things that are important to do, but the tension is it's a church.
Yeah.
And as you said, the church is open to all people. However, as a pastor and as members, deacons, it's open to all people, but we're not under any obligation not to protect ourselves. And so there's a balance between being open, but at the same time, if someone comes to do bodily harm to the pastor or to members of the church has not only a right but an obligation to secure and protect the people who have come to worship. Their children in the church. There are senior citizens in the church. And so there have been many occasions in my church and in my ministry throughout the years where you encounter people who come among you, and you always want to assume that that person is coming with the best of intentions. But at the same time, we have to be vigilant. And South Carolina reminds us that we have to really, really take seriously
this particular pastor, like any other black man, usually you can read a demon when he comes amongst you.
Sometimes you can.
Not necessarily.
Sometimes
Not
you
necessarily.
And in any church, you've got a whole lot of demons.
They're there.
But white demons should be easier to detect.
Demons aren't white. Demons are demons. They're spirits.
I'm sorry, you said a white demon should be easier to detect?
I mean,
there are no white demons. There are no black. There are demons. These are spirits.
I've seen my share of white demons, and I've seen my share of black ones too. So.
Well, it comes in all colors. I understand that.
Really hard to.
But I'm saying a young white child, really, in comparison, he looks like a kid.
Right.
All right. He comes to the church. He obviously sat down in Bible study and exchanged words and seemed to be, you know, one woman says in this piece I'm going to run that she forgave him, but we enjoyed you in Bible study.
Right.
So obviously he was in there interacting. He came in and asked for the pastor.
Part of the deception. And this is where, you know,
but how would the pastor know he's being deceptive?
Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The fact that one is in church or in any house of worship, the word thug comes from India. It doesn't come from these knuckleheads in the rap business. A thug, there was a sect of men in India in the 1500s that went around butchering people in temples while they worshipped. That's 500 years ago. Those were the thugs. Now, nothing has changed. We do not. I'll just give you this. When you're praying in our church, everybody isn't praying. Because that is the time for someone to take advantage when a head is bowed. So, just as at the river with Gideon, you don't put your face down in the water to drink. You cup the water, you look for the enemy. People are praying in our church, but every head is not bowed. You know why? Because there are people watching to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm not going to break down what we do and how we do it. But we don't leave people that vulnerable. And also, most churches are what we call soft targets.
Yeah.
They're easy to get into, full access, you come in, and everybody is relaxed because they feel they're in a safe place.
And this wasn't a strange situation because the college is right down the street. The pastor actually thought there was a lost soul that he tried to help.
And more importantly, I'm sure that those folks in Bible study, in prayer meeting, were probably very, very happy to receive a young person. And he sat there, he went through the service, from what I've read, and almost had to psych himself up again to carry out the mission because the folk had been so kind to him. And he almost had to psych himself up by saying, no, but I have to complete the mission. I came here to do something and I have to do it. So that says several things. It says, number one, how wonderful these people are. And I'll tell you something. usually people who come to prayer meeting and Bible study are some of the best
real
people in
believers.
church.
Those are the real
Some
members.
of the real finest people in a church. And so that's a great tragedy that happened.
You got the best of the best.
Yeah, but it also shows, and what struck me, what's most interesting about this to me is, you know, during the election and the ascent of President Obama as the first African-American president, we went into, the country did, a euphoria and began talking about a post-racial America.
No one ever really believed
well,
that.
many people did. I think many people did.
They teach that at NYU. They're teaching that at NYU.
I think many people did, but I think rather than being his election moving us to a post-racial America, his election sort of brought out
the racism.
These remaining hidden vestiges of racism in our society. When you think about the fact, this young man was 21 years old. My daughter, Najma, is here in the studio with me. She's 22 years old. She was born in 1994, 93.
Right.
That means this boy was born in 1994. He is not someone that can attribute his hate to his upbringing, his rearing in an old time. This is a child that has come up in the for the most part in the 21st century, in the internet age, and yet he takes the same response to the race question that Dynamite Bob Chambliss took in the 1960s when he blew up the 16th Street Baptist Church. And so for those of us who think we've solved the problem of race in this country, we need to stop telling ourselves that, because there is a lot of work to be done. And if it's among 21-year-olds, then it's probably in kindergartens, it's probably in high schools and in elementary schools. And until we begin to really deal with this issue of race, we will continue to find other issues that we're more comfortable dealing with. But the race question, we have not been, as a country, comfortable dealing with. And we continue to sort of sweep it under the rug and not grapple with it in a substantive way.
You might add to that that he was, 14 when Obama was elected president.
Absolutely.
So his whole upbringing is under a black president.
Absolutely.
And as he said, black people are taking over the country and raping their women. I mean, that's straight out of the white supremacy.
That's a throwback.
handbook.
And not just white supremacists, the politicians.
Right.
Because
Lindsey Graham's contributed
the Tea
to all
Party and these individuals have for years been saying we have to take back our country.
That's right.
Well, you have to take it back from who?
Absolutely.
From what?
Absolutely.
What are you talking about?
Right.
And you got to remember all the code words.
Absolutely.
All right? In the language of this American in the context of American language, there's what is called double speak.
Right.
And that's the double speak is what white people use when they don't want it. You know, they talk about, well, President Obama said the N-word. Well, let's get real. All right? All these politicians are using the N-word. They may not use it to their face, but they're using it. All right? And that's the problem, because this N is sitting in the White House. When we come and sit at the table, just as you said, until we can come and do that and open up and air it, it's never going to be resolved. I challenged students at Quinnipiac Law School some years ago. I don't need you to come to New York to demonstrate. You need to do something here in Quinnipiac. You need to confront your father, your grandfather, your uncle about the tendencies that they have, and you can't tell me that you are a liberal until you're willing to give up the benefits that you've got. Because some of you are here solely because your uncle made some donation to the school or whatever, and you're here. But the few black faces I see here, I know they didn't get in here because of their uncle. They took their LSATs and everything else, and they're qualified to be there. Some of you have paid to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as you make that point, and as you talk about that young man growing up in the era of Obama,
Right.
but he's also grown up in the era of Rush Limbaugh,
Exactly. There you go.
Karl
Fox
Rove.
Hannity,
News.
Levin,
Yeah.
Karl Rove, as you say,
Palin,
Fox,
Sarah Palin, all these
All the
individuals.
lies that have been told.
and quite contrary to what you told those students at Quinnipiac Law School, the message that this young man has gotten is that it is blacks, if they find their way to Quinnipiac or to Yale or to NYU Law School, it is because of affirmative action. It is, this is the essence of what he's been told is wrong with this country. And it is shocking when you consider the fact that this is a 21-year-old, and all of the moderate blacks or people who have taken a moderate course and want to sort of act like the ball has moved so far down the field that we can move to a race-neutral conversation, race-neutral sort of outlook on life, our politics, our economic outlook. His act sort of clearly states that, no, the problem of race, as Du Bois outlined it, it would be the color line, the problem of the color line would be the problem of the 20th century. Well, clearly, we still have a problem with the color line when a 21-year-old carries out such a heinous act, motivated purely by hate, by racism, that has been nurtured, watered, and cultivated by any number of right-wing talk radio show hosts that are making millions of dollars, have many mainstream advertisements. It's interesting that Walmart and some of these multinationals are dropping the Confederate flag, but until they drop Hannity, until they drop Limbaugh, until they drop these people that have literally made the unsuspecting whites that listen to this drivel in the hinterlands, in Middle America, in the South, in New York City. It's almost like Orson Welles, you remember famously, did a radio show, and it was so convincing.
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, right? And I think it was in the 30s. It was in the 30s.
Yeah.
And it was so convincing. You don't go back that far.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
he was
anyway.
in the studio with us.
Well, anyway, he was so convincing that, according to what I've read, I don't know if it's true, there were folk who were jumping out of windows.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they literally thought that we were being invaded.
It seems so real.
We were being invaded by extraterrestrial characters. And I think that in many ways, there are folks who are people who are basically the salt of the earth, basically just normal people. But they have been fed a steady diet of this stuff during the 2 terms of President Obama. And I think that's the only explanation for how someone so young could carry out such a brutal act.
Well, he was set up, obviously. Somebody told him to go there and ask for this pastor and to sit there and carry out his mission.
Is that
I mean, that's
confirmed?
quite obvious.
Did he say that? He's already confessed to the crime, but where do we get that
He said that there
information?
was a mission. He was on a mission.
Yeah, but
he went there and purposely asked for the pastor, sat next to him, and went through this mission he was on.
But
so
you're saying somebody sent, it's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily so that somebody sent him.
Well, what was his mission?
We do know for months he was planning this. They said, his friend said he's been talking about this kind of stuff for more than 6 or 7 months. Unfortunately, none of his friends had enough common sense to say, well, you know, you're getting a little, you're out there on the edge. None of them went to any adults to notify them. And this is the problem in that silent majority, you see, because they're part of the crime. Because they knew something was going on and they failed to speak and address it. For fear of what? I don't know. For fear that maybe he might have taken reprisals against them? I don't know. But his friends knew. He was writing about this stuff on his Facebook page and other things, so people were aware, you know.
But
you
you think it was
can.
that crazy to go into a church and kill people?
This is not the first time we've had this happen. It's only that so many people were killed. This is not the first
When's
time.
the last time some white man walked into a black church and killed people?
A pastor was shot in the pulpit last fall. The bullet went through his Bible and hit him in the heart, and he was killed. I read about it in the paper, but this is not something that is on the news every day. As I said, there have been over 150 shootings in churches in the last year and a half, and over 40 people have been killed in churches across this country.
Wow.
So it's an issue that hasn't been addressed, and as long as we're not talking about this matter of race and how it affects people. Two cases. Look at this case, and let's go to Colin Ferguson. Okay?
Oh.
Two gunmen, multiple individuals murdered. Let's say multiple innocent people are murdered in both cases. And this is one of the things I discussed at Quinnipiac. What's the backstory? Backstory on Colin Ferguson, and very key point, they allowed a man who was not mentally stable to defend himself in New York State Supreme Court. Right. That was a crime in and of itself. But Colin Ferguson and his sister were orphans at a young age. Their parents left an estate to them. The lawyers handled the estate, and when he and his sister came of age, the lawyers had stolen all the money. Two white lawyers in Jamaica. So here he is, he's of age, and two white guys have stolen all the money his parents have left him and his sister. So he's penniless in Jamaica. He goes to school, he's doing what he has to do. He comes to the U.S. He's Jamaican, you're an immigrant. He's black, you're on the periphery. He can't get a job doing what he was trained to do in the United States. Because everybody comes here if it's the land of opportunity, but that ain't so. Now, he has a breaking point. And he gets on the Long Island Railroad, and he shoots and kills a number of people.
How many people?
I think it was 7 or 8 people he killed. Now, same scenario here at the church. What's the backstory on this young man? Because I told the students to see, this is why we cannot afford to allow inequality and any malady run through our society. Because you don't know when it's going to explode or where it's going to explode. It doesn't have to explode in Bedford-Stuyvesant. It doesn't have to explode in East New York, Brownsville, or South Bronx. It can blow up in your face in South Carolina. It can blow up in your face in Quinnipiac, Connecticut. And this was before Sandy Hook. And you see what happened in Sandy. When people go off, we are accountable for each other. Whether you're white, black, Asian, whatever you want to call yourself, we're accountable. Because when people go off, somebody gets hurt. And then there are quote-unquote innocent victims. But we are not innocent if we're not addressing the maladies in our society.
Well, I venture to say there's somebody else behind this instead of this one kid. I just, you know, you're the detective though, but I see something behind this, more than just a lone wolf.
Well,
it's got to be something.
Yeah.
I mean,
they will profile
you know what we're
him.
going to do? The Christian belief, as we all know, is to forgive your enemy and love your enemy and forgive those who persecute you and put you down. But I've never seen it quite done like this. I mean, especially under this circumstances. And I'm going to play for you the arraignment where the victim's family forgive this demon. All right, and it's quite emotional. I know I sat there and being a Christian, going to church all this time, and my pastor, you remember Reverend Grant?
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, like, you know, God puts things in front of you, you know, especially when I'm about to do a show. And I ran across this last tape he made, and it was about imitating God.
Wow, I want a copy of that.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating.
When I was in the Nation, I used to listen to Reverend Grant on the radio all the time in my car. Yeah, it was my neighbor in Mount Vernon. Great
Right.
man.
Now,
Yeah.
this is the most humble pastor I've ever met in
Great
life.
man.
And he saved my soul. I
Great
mean,
man.
that's why my spirit sent me back to convent, and I met Reverend Grant, and he made me a true believer. Matter of fact, he told me I looked like Jesus, and that really blew my mind.
All right.
And
I gotta see
when
the
I was
photo.
baptized, I mean, look, pastor, you're a pastor, so you know what you can do your parishioners.
Yes.
I mean, I was sold. And then when I was baptized on Easter, I was looking over. I mean, I was spooked. I really thought something special was going to happen. And with the name and all, I said, oh, my goodness. So what I want to show is what we all have to understand as Christians, that we're supposed to forgive our enemies. But I want to roll this clip, and we'll come back and see what our viewers think of it.
Solicitor Wilson, do you have any statement to make before this court today in regards to these charges?
Not now, Your Honor.
Not at this time. Mr. Pennington, do you have any statements to make to this court in regards to these charges?
Your Honor, I've met with Mr. Roof. I think he understands the proceedings. He understands that only a circuit court can set bond in the murder cases. Therefore, we're prepared today to accept the no bond arrangement. We appreciate the court's courtesy, and I will gather all information and supply it to him in due course.
Thank you. Before we go into the bond process, I would like to ask, are there any members, or is there a representative of any of the family that would be here that wish to make a statement before this court before I post or set the bond? You are representing the family of Ethel Lance, is that correct?
Yes.
And you are whom, ma'am?
The daughter.
The daughter. I'm listening, and you can talk to me.
I just want everybody to know, to you, I forgive you. You took something very precious away from me. I would never talk to her ever again. I would never be able to hold her again. But I forgive you. And have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people. But God forgive you. And I forgive you.
Representative of the family of Myra Thompson.
You know, I forgive you and my family forgive you. But we would like you to take this opportunity to repent. Repent. Confess. Give your life to the one who matters the most, Christ, so that he can change it, can change your ways no matter what happened to you, and you'll be okay. Do that, and you'll be better off than what you are right now.
Taiwan Sanders.
Felicia Sanders.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders, for being here.
We welcome you Wednesday night in our Bible study with open arms. You have killed some of the most beautifulest people that I know. Every fiber in my body hurts. And I'll never be the same. Tawanza Sanders is my son, but Tawanza was my hero. Tawanza was my hero. But as we said in Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you.
Your name, ma'am?
Alana Simmons.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons, for being here. Your statement, please.
Although my grandfather and the other victims died at the hands of hate, this is proof, everyone's plea for your soul is proof that they lived in love and their legacies will live in love. So hate won't win. And I just want to thank the courts for making sure that hate doesn't win.
Thank you, ma'am, for being here. Your name, please, ma'am?
the thing, Middleton Brown.
Thank you for being here.
The opinion doctor was my sister. And I too thank you on behalf of my family for not allowing hate to win. For me, I'm a work in progress, and I acknowledge that I am very angry. But one thing DePayne has always joined in our family with is that she taught me that we are the family that love built. We have no room for hate, so we have to forgive. And I pray God on your soul, and I also thank God that I won't be around when your judgment day comes with him. May God bless you.
Ms. Wilson, is there anything that you wish to tell the court?
No, sir, Your Honor. I just wanted to make it clear for those who aren't familiar, again, with our process, that you don't have authority to set bond on the murder charges, so that's why you aren't addressing those. We do have the bond for the one firearms charge. So regardless of what bond you set, the defendant will remain in custody.
Yes, ma'am. On the 9 counts of murder, I do not have the authority to set bond on these charges. On the one count of possession of a weapon during the commission of the crime, a violent crime, I'm setting your bond, young man, at $1 million. Is there anything else to come before this court today in regards to this case? Hearing none, we stand concluded in this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I mean, that was church.
Yeah.
After all that, they asked him to repent.
Yeah.
You think possibly this kid might repent and God might reach out? I mean,
Well,
God's in charge here, right?
Let me say this. As you said, that kid, as he stood there,
he felt it.
in that well, knowing, sober now,
Yeah.
not listening to the hate speech, the hate radio, but actually looking at his life, reflecting over what he had done, and then for that soul force, that powerful,
You
forgiving ethic to be laid on him, I know without question that one day in his life, if he hasn't already, he'll do several things. Number one, he will stand convicted. And when I say convicted, within himself, he will be convicted that what I did was a grave evil and it was wrong. And then he will live out the rest of his days in regret and in repentance, trying to change what he did. And unfortunately, he will never be able to change what he did in terms of those 9 people. And that's why, you know, people who take to the airwaves and really just lay on people this fear-mongering and hatred, they really ought to consider the folks who are listening to them.
Right.
And so that display of forgiveness, of grace and compassion, in my judgment, there's no people on the earth
That's right.
that have ever demonstrated
That's
that
it.
ability
Amen.
to forgive as African Americans
That's
in
right.
this country have.
Amen. Amen.
Now, I'm not saying that had that been me, I've got 2 seminary degrees. I've pastored 2 churches and 1 mosque. And I'm not saying that I would be there. And I fully understand that I'm a sinner saved only by the grace of God. But here's
But you couldn't do that.
I don't think I could. And in fact, let me put it this way. I know I couldn't directly in the aftermath of losing a loved one.
But what is that telling us then?
Well, it tells me several things. Number one, it tells me, because I live every day as an African American, and I know what has happened to us as a people, and I've watched my people, my ancestors and my elders, and the forgiveness ethic among African Americans is real. I mean, that's the only way that we've been able to come out of slavery, segregation, discrimination, and take the place that we have in this country. But the other thing it does tell me, and this concerns me, that we need to be able to own our own pain, our own anger, and there's no rush. There's no rush for people to be compelled to stand there and look in the face of someone that killed their mother and their child and say, I forgive you. And I hope that the pastors who are advising these folks will not make them feel that it was their obligation to stand there in court and do that.
Well,
now, if their convictions, if their heart, if their theology caused them to do that, then I respect that, because only someone who has lost a loved one in that circumstance understands their feelings, and I will not pretend to understand their feelings. But I will say
But that is the Christian doctrine.
It is the Christian doctrine, but the Christian doctrine does not say that we've got to do it days afterwards, and we have to do it before there's been a conviction. But I can't judge, because see, maybe those folk were able to quickly reconcile what had happened to their loved ones and come to that. I cannot speak for them, and obviously in no way will I pretend to.
Obviously, this kid fooled them. I mean, they really fooled them. The woman says, we enjoyed you.
Absolutely.
We enjoyed you. How could you?
You see, but they were expressing godliness towards this young man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Christ expressed godliness, and you also had Judas.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And the interesting thing about that, what Judas did, it says in Scripture that when Judas stepped away from Jesus and left that room, not while he was with him, but when he stepped away from Christ, it says Satan, not a demon, it says Satan entered Judas.
Okay.
And Judas was not functioning in his own mind when he did what he did. And part of this, for those that can understand it and believe in the spiritual realm, no man or woman can overpower a spirit. Impossible. We're on a physical plane, but it is the spirit in you and me and everybody that we can't see that moves us to do what we do. And when Judas did what he did, it says that when Judas came to himself, when Satan left him, he left that body and gave it back to Judas. And when Judas realized what he had taken part in, he went out and hanged himself.
Yeah.
The last arrest that I effected as a detective was for homicide. It was a 17-year-old boy in Bed-Stuy. He and another friend tried to rob a guy, wound up killing him, shot the guy to death. And I said to him, I have to send you to state prison at age 17. You should be playing ball, going out with your girlfriend, hanging out with your friends, but you're going to state prison, and you can't protect yourself from grown men in state prison. I said, but you can't bring him back. What you have to do now is figure out what you're going to do with yourself when you get out of prison. You have to take yourself 17, he was sentenced to 17 years. You have to take yourself down the road and see and ask yourself, what kind of man am I going to be when I get out? Not while I'm in there, but when I come out. How am I going to evolve and make the changes? And you also have to seek forgiveness for what you've done. You cannot bring him back. You've messed up, I've messed up, everybody messes up. You need to sit down and talk with God and resolve that. That guy Reyes, who was the Central Park rapist, as brutal and heinous and evil as he was, he found God in prison. That's where he had to be in order to come and sit in solitude to find out the very God that made him. Same thing with the crazy guy that was shooting, Son of Sam. All right? It wasn't until, and I've spent a lot of time, I used to go to Sing Sing regularly years ago. And there were many men there that said prison was the best place for them to be because it was there that they found God. If they were free enough to be running around, they probably would have been dead a long time ago. But because of the fact that God snatched them and threw them in that cell, they had time to come and meet their maker before they died and turn their life around while they were incarcerated.
My main concern is how this is going to affect us as black people. You know, we have an instance here where a white kid walks into a church, our sanctuary, you know, and they forgive him. And we have black people saying they're fools. I mean, we have Muslims going down to Georgia, and Khalid's down there now saying, you know, I haven't gotten the full story, but I know he's there. And people are looking at, like they looked at Dr. King, the punk, you know, and believing this Christian doctrine. You know, you and I both, it's hard for us to believe that we couldn't do it. I mean, we're Christians, but it's hard. But this is what we're taught.
Well, absolutely.
This is what we're supposed to do. Reverend Grant, I was bringing up in this sermon he gave, he said, you got to love people like God loves people. Now, he's been dead 10 years now. And do you know, every time I get mad or I get upset or really about to go off, I get this little voice that says, you got to love people like God loves people. And that's crazy. I mean, when you're about to snap, as you say, I get this voice that says to me, you got to love people like God loves people. But that's the most difficult thing in the world.
Well, it is.
But look at the hatred that we have. Now, this is what makes us hateful right here. The white man did this to us. We've been in slavery, and we develop all this hate. And we wind up killing each other half the time. All right? This is our biggest problem. How do we get each other, get our people, us as a people, to stop hating each other and killing each other with this hate of the white man and racism?
I tell you,
using that as an excuse to kill each other.
Well, you know, anyone that uses racism as an excuse to engage in black-on-black violence, fratricide, is certainly misguided. But as I said to my congregation on Sunday, what we saw from the victims' families, true, it is a huge example of grace. Grace is undeserved consideration. It's forgiveness that you haven't earned. It's literally mercy, and these victims' families demonstrated mercy to the highest degree that you'll ever see human beings demonstrated. In fact, it's exemplary. I don't again, I don't know any other people on the earth that have consistently risen above their human emotions, their natural emotions, and been able
to follow God,
and been able to forgive and to be true to their doctrine. And again, I would never call anyone a fool that came to that level of forgiveness.
Oh, you have.
I can only speak for myself.
You have
and I know,
people doing that.
Well, you do. You have people doing it, but that's not for me to judge.
Okay.
If my son is killed, or my mother, my loved one, that's a space that I don't want anyone to even try to occupy that pain and that space with me. So if that's the conclusion they have come to, then to me, I sit back in awe. And I ask my God to help give me insight into how they came to that conclusion. However, I will say this, and I said this to my congregation on Sunday. If we can forgive in a situation like that, such a big example of a magnanimous sort of example of forgiveness,
right,
then we have to be able to implement.
That's right.
Grace is no good if it only is us being able to forgive whites when they perpetuate crimes against us, or if it's only us being able to forgive people in the context of these big, horrific incidents. But we got to be able to do it every day.
That's right.
To each other. Small ways.
To each other.
And to each other.
That's right.
And that transcends color, transcends race, transcends class. It will make the world and the society a far better place if we could begin to implement this ethic It's not a virtue when you can't forgive. It really is not a virtue. And there's some folks who've made an art of it. But it's not a virtue because, as Reverend Jackson used to say when I first started working with him back in the 80s, he may have said it before when I first heard it, he said, you can't hold someone in a ditch unless you linger there with them.
Ah, okay.
You can't hold someone in a ditch. So when I can't forgive, then I'm stuck in a place. When I can forgive, I move on with grace, with dignity. Now there's something to be said. I can't say to my Jewish friends, it's wrong to say never again.
Well, say never again.
We'll never forget.
Get rid of the hate.
We'll never forget. It's not,
get rid of the hate, though.
Well,
doesn't that destroy you?
Well, hate does destroy from within. But my point is, we have to find the balance as black people between saying we remember what's happened to us.
You can't live on that.
That's right.
On
but at the same
basis.
time, we can rise to that level of grace. And these good folks in South Carolina have given the world an example.
Amen. Amen. That's my point. That's my point. That's exactly my point.
You know, the issue with the flag, with Nikki Haley.
Oh, that's another.
Real quick, she's fronting. She's not about taking the flag down because they want to bring her in as a vice presidential candidate. So they want it to appear that she's for it because the legislature still has to approve it. But bringing the flag down is not the issue. That is just a front. Whether the flag is up there or not, the question is, where is the change? She said, this act of this boy is not going to separate us. When were they together? At what point were black people and white people really together? They haven't been together in South Carolina.
Well, not just in South Carolina, in New York.
In the United States, period.
And I think you're absolutely right.
Because race has not been dealt with.
We haven't dealt with. That's the issue. And that's, if there's one disappointment I have of the Obama presidency, I thought that he would deal more squarely and forthrightly with the issue of race in this country, and I think he should. I think the first black president, yes, he was elected to be the president of the United States, but one of the most important and fundamental issues that the United States has not dealt with is the issue of race. And if Franklin Delano Roosevelt could deal with race, poverty, and class,
refused to deal with
rich.
And
I think Obama, this was his moment. This was his issue.
The God in me loves the God in you. Now, I truly believe that and mean it because we see what we're up against. God bless you. Amen.
All right. Thank you. All right.
I was watching an interview with